Hi everyone, welcome back to Poetology. I am away in Poland for a few weeks at the moment, and I decided to read another series by Strangers Press. And this time I went for the 5 books in the Lithuanian series. Strangers Press is putting out several series, each focused on a particular country, and releasing short fiction by different writers from that country. And a few weeks ago, I read the Swiss series, which you can watch at the link above. Now, the Swiss series had 8 books, and this one only has 5. But what I really liked with the Lithuanian series was that they were all short stories, and I thought that the series as a whole was quite coherent thanks to that. I've called this the holiday edition because you will get a few shots of me opening these books in various places in the garden and the cottage where I'm staying. The first one was Vidas, Morkunas, Death and Other Stories. And before I start, I have to say I know absolutely nothing about Lithuanian literature. I know very little about Lithuania at all, so this was a complete discovery for me. So Vidas Morkunas is an author of prose and poetry and a literary translator. These are 4 very short stories, and in these short stories he incorporates magical realist elements. I thought descriptions of scenery and places were really good. Animals came back as a motif in several of the stories. I really enjoyed the strangeness of some of these stories, but I thought sometimes some of the steps were skipped and it was difficult to know how the author got from one idea to the next and how the story progressed, and it wasn't quite logical or fully understandable. It was full of ideas that maybe weren't always realized as well as they could have been. Number 2 is Bodies by Akvile Kavalauskaite, and obviously I have no idea how to pronounce these names and whether I'm doing it right. These were 5 short stories. Again, in a very short volume, 5 short stories, so very short fiction, almost microfiction. This writer is a journalist and prose writer, and she was born in 1988. I really liked her study of characters and how characters and relationships evolved over time. I'm going to read you a short quote. For 10 years, she believed that he would change. He believed that she wouldn't change. And now both had been wrong and no one is satisfied. I really liked how sharply she analyzed characters and represented them in their interactions and relationships. And then some of the characters come back in other stories, so there is a bit of not quite a follow-up. I mean, one of them is a follow-up on an earlier story actually, but even when it's not directly linked to the narrative, some characters come back, and so you start to know them a little bit more, which is actually very nice in such short stories to have a thread running through somehow, something that reveals different facets of the characters. Now, this one might have been my favorite. It is Juvenilia by Virginia Kulvinskaite. She's a writer, literary critic and scholar, and review editor. And first of all, I really enjoyed the cover. It's really lush with pictures and things, and to me it looks a little bit like a zine, and specifically a 1990s zine. The writing itself was refreshing, and much of it was looking back on a youth spent in the 1990s, which is something I can easily relate to. The way that it was written didn't use any capital letters ever, and while that's not groundbreaking, it does give a certain style to the writing, a certain visual style. Some decisions were made by the translator not to translate many of the words, but to instead have a glossary at the end. And that may interrupt the reading a little bit more, or if you are like me and you just read through anyway, it means that you may not grasp everything that's going on until you check the glossary. But I enjoyed it because it gave me a little snippet of Lithuanian language in the text, and it gave a particular flavor to the stories that would not be there otherwise. It wasn't that many words. The glossary is actually hidden here. As you can see, it's only a few words in that glossary, and it's easy to check it. There were 3 stories in here, so they were slightly longer than some of the previous ones, which was nice because it gives you time to get into the atmosphere of the story. It could be autofiction, or at least it's quite clear that the writer has some experience of those times, whether she's talking about herself or not. And there were some mental health issues involved as well, which to me gave it a little bit of depth. Number 4 was Taxi Driver by Jurga Thomasson Ite, who is a prose author and interviewer. This was a single short story, and because these books are pretty short, this one has 34 pages, it's usually 30 to 40 pages, it's actually a good thing to have a single short story that can explore things in a bit more depth. And this story provides the life trajectory of a character, Razma. Or maybe not her entire life, but like a good chunk of her life. And I enjoyed being able to follow up on this character through several years of her life. The title Taxi Driver was based on the Martin Scorsese's film, and there's a short quote, the most well-known "So you're talking to me" quote. For me, there were slightly too many secondary characters. I'm not very good at remembering who is who in a story, so introducing that many characters in 30 pages was a bit too much. I would forget them and not be sure when they came back. That's an issue I personally have, but if you're like me, that's probably something you should know. And finally, this is The Sleep of Birds, which I guess is the best title of the series, The Sleep of Birds by Thomas Vaiseta. Vaiseta is a writer, historian, and associate professor. There were 2 short stories in this book. The Sleep of Birds, the title story, was a masculine exploration of sexuality and bisexuality. It also talked about the Sovietic and familial influence on sexuality that some of the characters are grappling with. And the second story talked about a mental health institution in terms that were quite troubling. I think it was meant to be a little disturbing, but I wasn't fully following the author's descriptions and ideas there. I have to say this wasn't my favorite in the series. I only really loved the title, but as a series, let's say it, I found it much more coherent than the Swiss series because all of them were short stories, often very short stories, and because it stayed coherent with the fictional focus, it was easy to move from one to the next. And as usual, I find this series very beautiful. I just really like the graphic design of the books and the very colorful covers, and they're really easy to take with you and read in different places. I hope you enjoyed this little glimpse into my holiday. Let me know in the comments if you would like to read one of these books, or if there are other books you would like to read for your holiday. And I look forward to seeing you again very soon in the next video. Bye!